Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, localized games were hard to come by. I remember playing on a Japanese copy of Mega Man X on a Super Nintendo. I couldn't read any of the dialogue, yet I felt like I understood the story. I was able to feel the personalities of each boss through the amazing character and level designs, and I also had a lot of fun just filling in the blanks myself. Fast forward a decade later to when I first played Dark Souls. I can read the dialogue now, but the cryptic storytelling and cutscenes might as well be Japanese. I didn't really get what any of them were talking about. But at the same time, I still felt the emotional impact behind each crucial gameplay moment in Dark Souls. No other game has ever given me such dread, pain, and sense of accomplishment like this before. This was a different type of storytelling, one that I now know as gameplay narrative, referenced as the type of narrative that is built as the sum of the player's actions. In this video, I want to explore how FromSoft is able to use level design to create such an emotional journey for the player. I'll analyze the level design for each major section of the game in order, and relate it back to how I felt playing it for the first time, covering topics like enemy placement, space and pacing, level architecture, and many more. By the end, you'll understand FromSoft's iconic level design techniques and how they are able to tell a story through gameplay instead of dialogue. Welcome, my name is Alan and I'm a game designer working on my own tactics RPG. On this channel, I analyze games and mechanics to see what makes them fun so we can improve our own designs and to appreciate games at a deeper level. Enjoy! You start the game in the Undead Asylum. This is a tutorial area and it's pretty straightforward, so I won't go into much detail, but there are two things to note here. First, it uses the Asylum setting well with lots of horizontal turns to mask the linear nature of tutorials to make things more engaging. Then there's also this sneaky bastard who rolls a boulder on you. It's a bit of a funny gacha against first-time players, but it also opens up the wall to an important NPC that gives you the Estus Flask. A lot of gachas in Dark Souls may frustrate you in the moment, but actually lead you towards your objective. More on that later though. You defeat the Asylum Demon and arrive at Firelink Shrine. Right away you'll notice a complete shift in gameplay due to all this newfound freedom. Firelink Shrine intersects many paths, and it's not very obvious which area you should explore first. Chances are you will go into one of the harder areas and get completely brutalized. This leads to the first narrative theme and emotion I felt, a sense of overwhelming hostility and insignificance. Everything and everyone is out to get you, and you are not the main character. I believe that the first part of the game, arriving at Firelink Shrine and ringing the first bell of awakening, all lean into this idea. By the way, I'm analyzing the game in the order that's the most common for new players to go through. And I'm also going to be skipping over a few optional areas in the encounters so that the video doesn't end up being 2 hours long. So after trying each path from the Firelink Shrine, you end up going towards the Undead Burg. The level design techniques this area excels at is all about enemy placement and pacing. The first encounter already paints an accurate picture of the world of Lordran and what you're up against. This is a very classic FromSoft enemy placement setup. You have an item being guarded by enemies in plain sight, and a ranged attacker that harasses you if you rush towards that item. And when you do go after the ranged attacker, another enemy flanks you from the side. This type of enemy placement lets you know that they are not messing around. This is not a fair fight and you have to be cool, calm, and collected to survive Lordran. After a few more encounters, a massive drake makes an appearance. A dramatic set piece that further cements your position in the world as an insignificant passerby. The drake doesn't even acknowledge you and it could have easily crushed you right there and then. You fight through another classic ranged and melee encounter to find a bonfire. The bonfire placements in Dark Souls dictate the pacing of the level and provides a much needed break for you to strategize and continue onwards. I noticed that FromSoft likes to place bonfires right after a tense encounter when you need it the most to maximize its impact. I'll keep an eye on this as we progress towards the first bell to show you what I mean. Pushing past the bonfire, you get hit by another ambush while firebombs and arrows are launched from afar. There's a critical moment here where you have the opportunity to use this to your advantage. So rather than fighting a crowd out in the open, you learn how to use the narrow openings as choke points to take on enemies one by one. And when you defeat the archer up above, you also get an access to a nice vantage point to see the enemies up ahead. Admittedly, first time players probably wouldn't notice, but it is possible to spot the barrel trap up ahead, rewarding players who pay attention. These type of enemy placements are seemingly rigged against you on first glance, but they actually work with the level to create opportunities for you to outsmart enemies. The Taurus Demon fight is another great example of this. If you take care of the archers shooting you in the back, you end up in a position to do a big plunging attack. These type of setups are great at making you feel like you are outsmarting your enemies, almost like you're adapting to the hostility of Lordran. After defeating the Taurus demon, with barely any flasks left and holding a ton of souls, you could really use a bonfire. But instead, the Drake returns for a surprise attack. Almost all new players fall here, and they have to fight through the Undead Berg again carefully to retrieve their souls. Observant players will find an opening on the side of the bridge, which leads back to a familiar bonfire. This interconnected level design, paired with the dramatic tension of the Taurus demon and the Drake encounter, creates a super memorable scene in Dark Souls. It's one of the first aha moments you discover playing the game. If instead a bonfire is placed right after Taurus demon, a lot of the tension would be lost too early. FromSoft is great at pushing the tension and getting the pacing just right. The second half of this area uses a lot of the same principles to enhance the same narrative gameplay of an unimportant undead facing the brutality of Lordran. Enemy placement is still in a familiar format, but now there's more complexity mixed in. In this encounter with a metal boar, a row of archers will pelt you from the distance. If you rush towards the archers, you will get the alluring skull item. Resourceful players will figure out that these skulls can be tossed into the fire pits to lure the metal boar in, once again giving players the tools to use the environment for an advantage. After this, you make it to the cathedral and face much stronger enemies than you're used to. This area is guarded by several Baldur Knights, followed by a heavy armor knight and a spellcaster. This is an extremely high tension area, and after surviving, you take this unassuming elevator to find out you're right back at Firelink Shrine. This is maybe the most iconic moment in Dark Souls, not just because it showcases the creative and connected open level design, but also because you're at a very tense moment within the level. I believe the pacing of this area is a super underrated aspect for how memorable these moments really are. From just a gameplay perspective too, this shortcut is also very useful as it gives you quick access to Andre the Blacksmith from Firelink Shrine. FromSoft made sure you're able to upgrade your weapon right before the climax of this section, the Bell Gargoyle fight. A Gargoyle fight is the last skill check you face for what I consider to be the introduction of this game. The surprise second Gargoyle and their mix of ranged and melee attacks tests your ability to stay composed and prioritize the right target, a lesson that's drilled into the player at this point throughout every encounter. When you finally defeat the Bell Gargoyles, you've conquered the hostility of the Undead Berg and made your presence known. You slowly climb up several ladders, creating a sense of accomplishment as you rise above the world to ring the first bell of awakening. To carefully manage enemy placements and pacing, the gameplay narrative unfolds naturally to make you feel like you've risen above the rest of the undead. You are no longer another nameless undead destined to rot away in a prison. You are now the chosen undead. With your newfound confidence, you continue towards the second bell of awakening. This section of the game is unique because it's actually a linear progression from the lower Undead Berg to the depths, to Blighttown, and finally to Quelaag's domain. Compared to the open layout around Firelink Shrine, your only option here is to go deeper and deeper. Of course, as a new player you don't know that, and I think it's designed this way to lean into the next gameplay narrative I felt. Throughout the journey towards the second bell, I progressively felt more anxious and dreadful. It felt like a journey into the unknown with no end in sight. The layout of the levels are designed with lots of verticality and uneven footing, designed to slow you down. The environment and enemy designs also get progressively more grotesque. These level design elements combine to make the gameplay narrative one that's full of fear, dread, and uncertainty. So as a designer, how can you make sure that players are still motivated enough to continue, despite the levels causing so much stress and negative emotional impact? I'm gonna go over each area now to explain how FromSoft is able to walk this fine line. The path to the second bell of awakening starts at the lower Undead Berg. Enemies here attack in a way that creates an interesting contrast between the upper and lower Undead Berg. In the lower Berg, the streets are on fire and there are rabid dogs roaming about, and thieves will jump out of buildings to ambush you. It's quite a different tone compared to the structured military-like formations the undead soldiers took in the upper Undead Berg. It's an interesting gameplay detail that I noticed that plays into a common storytelling theme between the upper and lower class. You also find literal angry mobs of enemies in the lower Berg. This categorization hints towards a descent towards desperation that you'll soon see as you go down deeper into the depths and Blighttown. The area boss for this section, the Capra Demon, also strengthens this theme. The crowded arena and dirty tactic this boss uses is exactly the type of tactic that someone struggling to survive would choose. To counteract this type of, let's be honest, cheap strategy, FromSoft made the walk back to this area very fast with a shortcut to a familiar bonfire. The thieves leading up to this boss is also fairly trivial once they lose their element of surprise. When you defeat the Capra Demon, you are given access to the depths. The depths is where the vertical level layout of this section really starts to shine. You fight on narrow staircases and floors that take you lower and lower. Darkness hides enemies that are waiting to ambush you, forcing you to check in every direction before proceeding, creating a sense of paranoia. The enemies here continue to show desperation, so much so that they resort to cannibalism as seen through the butcher's preparations. Slugs also fall from the ceiling, adding more verticality to the level. It's also no coincidence that this is the area you can free Laurentis to learn pyromancy, with many enemies here being weak to fire. And if you're not playing a pyromancy build, the large ember is obtained here too, so you can upgrade your weapons even further. Quite a lot of player power is given right in this area, making sure the player is able to handle a long journey down to Blighttown. In the lower depths, you progress through a maze-like sewer. This time verticality is done with holes in the ground, with enemies and items placed to bait you into falling through. When it happens, it's easy to panic and get swarmed by enemies, but if you keep your cool and fight your way back, you'll find that FromSoft actually rewards you with powerful items or puts you at surprisingly useful locations, like this caster you sneak up on, which would otherwise be attacking you in the upcoming boss fight. This type of level design reminds me of a concept in tabletop RPGs, where players often fail forward, an idea that failure should be partial and be used to move the plot forward in an alternative, surprising way. Rather than having the setback be completely negative, it makes for more interesting and forgiving gameplay when the player is rewarded by rolling with the punches and exploring different paths. You can imagine how tedious this area would be if each time you accidentally fell into a pothole, you simply had to fight your way back up to the same spot with no additional reward. Skipping forward a bit to the Gaping Dragon, this fight is actually pretty simple if you took out the caster earlier. Visually though, it has a unique and, in my opinion, a funny and charming design, in that it appears to be a tiny alligator with a massive dragon attached to it. Looking back at it now, I think this design might be FromSoft subtly hinting that the depths is nothing compared to the horrors you'll soon find below in Blighttown. After you defeat the Gaping Dragon, you can progress to Blighttown. There's a sharp transition in atmosphere as the whole screen turns from a quiet, unified dark tone to a nasty, toxic, and dirty green. A new player at this point has no idea how much more there is to go until they reach the second bell. Blighttown is the area that really sells the fear and dreadfulness the best out of every area here. And from a level design perspective, it's basically the depths amped up in every way. Verticality is at its strongest here. The level itself shifts to uneven planks with enemies trying to knock you down at every turn. Enemies are no longer hollowed undead, instead they're mutated residents of Blighttown that are way more threatening. There's also these infamously annoying toxic dart enemies sniping you from a distance, triggering a sense of urgency and panic. I want to quickly mention that in the original Dark Souls, Blighttown was optimized poorly and players would go through the level at low frame rates, sometimes as low as 10 to 15. This contributed heavily to the overall feeling of dread and horror here. Don't get it twisted though, you'd had to be psychotic as a level designer to intentionally tank your game's FPS for the sake of creating a negative response for the player. I just think that it's an interesting and unintended consequence of technical issues adding to gameplay narrative. Playing as an experienced player with stable framerate now, I'm actually a little bit surprised at how fast this level can be completed compared to my first time going through it. There are a lot of opportunities here for ballsy players to blitz through Blighttown. A lot of times you can follow items and just jump down platforms with no hesitation. If not, a careful player can take out the toxic dart enemies one at a time, since they don't respawn, and they're able to progress safely at a slower pace if needed. As long as you don't panic and succumb to fear, Blighttown really isn't that bad. The shaky vertical platforms and gruesome atmosphere makes it hard for you to stay composed, but a confident and patient player will be able to steadily progress further below. Now you've made it to the toxic swamp at the bottom of Blighttown. This area, in my opinion, is the weakest of the bunch. And I think FromSoft did a really good job at creating sticky levels that don't feel tedious in the previous areas. In other words, creating levels that require players to backtrack, go slower, or play more patiently without sacrificing pacing. The use of vertical designs create a sort of vertical stickiness that's still engaging, rather than the horizontal stickiness that's found in the swamp where you straight up just moved at a slower speed. Personally, I feel that forced stickiness should not be used very often, and the swamp could be restructured a bit to have some regular pathways with more enemies on it. That way, as a player, you can opt in to fight the area with lots of enemies or go around slowly in the swamp. One way FromSoft did incentivize the players to explore was to place bonfires at the edge and sprinkle a ton of items around the ground. There's also a much higher number of bonfires in this section compared to the surface, and I think that's a great way to alleviate some of the stress players will face down here. The route to Quelaag from the bonfire is also pretty short, but I don't really like how hard it is to avoid being poisoned on the way there. It's just a bit too annoying for my taste. Quelaag's design being half human and half monster is very fitting as the final boss for this entire journey. The slow descent starting from Lower Undead Berg with enemies and environment that gets progressively more transfigured as you go deeper is nicely culminated with Quelaag. It really complements the narrative that you're going to the depths of hell to fulfill your prophecy of ringing the second bell of awakening. You're not done though. After you ring the bell, you still have to make the climb back up to Firelink Shrine. This part is made a little bit easier with an elevator that takes you halfway up, but you still have to fight your way back up. And because of this additional climb, when you finally make it out of the area and return to Firelink Shrine, it's a completely different feeling than when you rang the first bell. There's not so much triumph as there is relief, almost like waking up from a terrible nightmare. The strong emphasis on verticality and the dreadful atmosphere of this section made for one of the most emotional journeys I've experienced in the game. After ringing the 2 bells of awakening, a cutscene shows the gates to Sen's Fortress being opened. This cutscene pretty much tells you exactly where you should go next, which has never happened up to this point, leading to the main gameplay narrative I felt here, rising to a challenge. At this point, the world acknowledges you truly as the chosen undead, and dares you to prove your skills through this gauntlet full of traps and challenges. Level design really shines here with its usage of props and the physical space you're given in each area. I've grouped Sen's Fortress and Anor Londo together in one chapter since you play them back to back, and also because they both utilize the same level design techniques in very different settings to support the same gameplay narrative. When you first enter Sen's Fortress, you're greeted with an immediate spike in difficulty. There's 2 man serpents right at the entrance waiting to flank you, and you're also greeted by an arrow trap if you're not careful. These man serpents are way tankier than any regular enemy you've faced so far. And if you made it through these 2, you're caught between another one with blade traps swinging behind you on a narrow walkway. All this is extremely overwhelming for your first playthrough. As you keep trying though, you realize that these traps can be used against the enemies just as much as they are used against you. The game subtly hints at this too. Man serpents in Sen's Fortress are placed pretty far apart throughout the level. Very rarely do you find multiple at once, except at the start. I think this is FromSoft encouraging players that kept failing to use the traps against the enemies. When properly aligned, the arrow trap at the beginning can take out a man serpent in 3 hits exactly, definitely not a coincidence. The man serpents you encounter for the rest of the level are almost all one-on-ones, and their extended health bar makes it obvious that regular attacks are not efficient. Couple this with the limited space within Sen's Fortress making it hard to move and swing your weapon, and it's clear that parrying is the way to go. The traps in Sen's Fortress are also very fair, and none of them are completely hidden for the sake of creating cheap gotchas. Players that pay close attention will notice details like bloodied spikes and burnt ground to realize something fishy is going on, the Mimic being the only exception to this. Almost all new players will fall for this, but it is noticeable just how out of place it looks when you're aware of Mimics being a thing in Dark Souls. That being said, I actually quite enjoy the surprise of being eaten by a Mimic on my first playthrough. I think having a bit of a surprise at times can be a fun and memorable experience, even if it did end up putting me back at the bonfire. The reward more than makes up for it too. The lightning spear is very hard to beat as a weapon for this area. With a newfound confidence in parrying and some clever usage of traps against the enemies, you make your way to the top of Sen's Fortress to find the Iron Golem. This menacing and oversized boss uses wide sweeps and slams on a tiny rooftop, knocking you off easily. Give it a few more tries and you find out that the same thing applies to it too. You can knock it down after focusing on its legs, and there's a high chance it will fall off the edge, ending the fight right there. A fitting fate for the Iron Golem, and an ending with maximum satisfaction after you've conquered and risen above every challenge in Sen's Fortress. You've mastered parrying and turned the dangers of the environment to your advantage, proving to yourself once again that you are ready for what's to come. The transition to Anor Londo and its reveal is another extremely memorable moment for me. Having just gone through Sen's Fortress, I wasn't sure what to expect next. All I can say is that it was not the beautiful scenery of Anor Londo. The contrast between Anor Londo and the rest of Lordran is massive, and it paints you as a different sort of challenger, almost like an outsider that doesn't truly belong. The area is decorated with regal artifacts with massive knights standing guard. And as you fight your way in, you find yourself at a broken window. You progress through the top of a ceiling like a cat burglar, further adding to the gameplay narrative that you're an unwelcomed intruder. Another usage of props I noticed in Anor Londo was just how many chests there are in the area, and how many of them are mimics too. It's almost like the residents of Anor Londo knew that the thieves here are capable of weaving through various traps found in Sense Fortress, and the best way to punish them is to use mimics disguised as chests. The wide empty space and quiet soundtrack of Anor Londo creates an eerie feeling. From the decorations, you get a sense that this was perhaps once a prosperous and safe area. Rooms have expensive artwork and fancy beds, and one room in particular even showcases all sorts of dragon head trophies. Yet when you explore deeper into Anor Londo, you find more and more silver knights patrolling the area. It's a strange feeling as you wonder why these knights are so determined to keep you out. You find your answer when you finally reach the end and meet Ornstein and Smo. This will be the toughest challenge yet. Trying to 1v2 Ornstein and Smo is extremely difficult, with Ornstein altering between fast follow-up attacks and range attacks, while Smo bulldozes you with powerful slams. You figure out that once again you need to use the space in the arena for your advantage and hide between pillars to separate the two bosses. After winning that intense fight, you are greeted by Guinevere, Princess of Sunlight. She gives you the Lord Vessel, an item that allows you to travel between bonfires. Maybe this is why the knights are so determined to keep you out. It's all part of a challenge to see if you're worthy of such item. Or maybe something's not right and somebody desperately wants you to stay away from Anor Londo, going so far as to give you an item that lets you teleport away. Sensing that there's something strange about Anor Londo, or if we're being completely honest here, you probably read a message on the ground. You attack Guinevere to find that it's all been an illusion. But that's a story for another video. Sense Fortress and Anor Londo both use props, environmental storytelling, and space in their level design to create two vastly different moods that push the same gameplay narrative. One of rising to the challenge and proving your worth. Conquering the challenges of Sense Fortress and Anor Londo might be the most satisfying moment in Dark Souls, and one that's completely earned too. We've examined in detail just how FromSoft is able to design levels to create so much emotional impact through narrative gameplay. The enemy placement and pacing of the first bell, the verticality and mood of the second bell, and finally, the usage of props and space within Sense Fortress and Anor Londo are all level design techniques we can draw inspiration from. I personally think this type of storytelling should be leaned into more. It's a unique way to tell stories that games excel at as an interactive medium, and it doesn't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive with more traditional forms of storytelling too. When it's done right like in Dark Souls, I was able to feel the emotional impact of each story beat naturally through gameplay, and create a narrative for my own journey, and I think there's something really special about that.